great things that AI can do for companies and how it can solve a lot of complex problems. What do you guys think the challenges that face companies to actually adopt AI, big companies and small companies too? Because I see that one of the biggest advantage of or benefits of AI for FinTech companies, small companies, that it gives them that edge that they can innovate and they can produce a lot using just machine learning and AI. So what do you think the challenges that actually companies face now?
So if you think about, let's say, the last innovation spike that we saw in the industry, probably you can go back to 2008 when Apple announced the App Store and then this new ecosystem got created, the digital media, spike on mobile devices. You could go and build a game, or you could go build a social platform, you could go build even a flashlight app, and that could potentially make you a millionaire or a billionaire. Now, if you go and build the next best AI algorithm, without having the data, you don't have anything. So in the past, you could basically innovate in your silos, leverage these prescriptive tools to build these new channels, game-based, augmented reality-based, and then you could build a company out of that. You could create value, you could solve pain points. When you think about AI without data doesn't mean anything. You can go build the next best deep learning optimization tool. If you don't have data, you don't have anything. The challenge we see is that if you look at the market, majority of the market in the next 10 years of the AI market is supposed to be dominated by startups. Sure, there are going to be big incumbents there, doing their great works, from Watson to Einstein to all the other big companies that are building these tools. But innovation will truly come from, university spin-offs. We saw a bit of that in the UK through DeepMind and others. And these are companies who can truly transform what's happening in the AI and build new tools because they don't have the legacy. Now, the challenge they face is that I need some data. Where is the data going to come from? Am I going to innovate in the health sector? Well, which hospital is going to give me their identifiable patient data? In Canada, we are talking about our FinTech cluster. We have great banks, but how many banks do we have that are very comfortable sharing their data with the startups? Do they know how to share that data with startups? Is it just the classic model that, yes, I sign an SLA with you, I give you access to the data, protected in a centralized repository? Or there is a room for types of innovation that allows you to consult that data without moving the data around. That is a key pain point right now, that we have some amazing startups, some of them are here, some of them are on the panel with us, that they are doing a lot of their innovations leveraging that data, and they want to predict, they want to optimize. But going through the cycle of working with a large financial institution to bring that data is a big challenge.
So just real quick, just yesterday in my office was an entrepreneur with a pretty cool small company, FinTech company, that used the phrase, data is the fuel for AI and machine learning, and that's sort of what you just said, Hossein. So I 100% agree, and what's interesting is these are sort of boring, tough problems, and all the companies that get all the headlines on billion-dollar plus valuations are these cool kind of B2C companies. We spend a lot of time in B2B or B2C enterprise kind of FinTech companies. We have a couple of B2C at the same time, but this sort of data problem, and so I'd call it one, is the banks are sitting on unstructured data, and it's piles and piles of paper that's been scanned, ugly paper. How does that data get activated? It's the build it here legacy of a big bank with the tech guys saying I'm the sort of, it's my silo and I have to be in control. And then it's lastly that trust factor, right, where you've got these little companies that how do you have credibility? I'm this giant bank. How could you do something I can't do? So all the three of those things kind of conspire to create issues. And what I have found, sort of the best advice is you can't go through the technology space, ownership, if you will. If you're selling the tech side of the bank or the financial institution, I probably have a short conversation with you because you're going to spend a lot of time talking to those people, and they're going to, put you through the ringer of demos and trials and lots of things like that. Get over to the business owner, and what this little company did, that's based in northern New Jersey and has now sold 4 or 5 large banks on what would you think is a really mundane problem? How do I take PDFs, Excel files, Word documents, contracts in the syndicated loan desk and figure out what those loans I actually own have in them? Because the SEC and the other auditors, the OCC, are saying, I need you to know every single one of those collateral. I need to know what's inside those contracts, and they can't do it. And so that sort of big data problem and artificial intelligence problem is like way down the road for them. It's really, how do I even figure out the data to then use machine learning to then figure out how to, you know, activate that information.
And so, just to conclude on that, so if you're interested in innovation areas, and one thing we are doing at Flybits is that gaining the ability to run inference on encrypted data without moving the data around. And that's, there's a lot of room for innovation there, and you can build a lot of key capabilities around that, is that how do you ask questions from the data and not necessarily move the data around. And that's why Flybits is doing work with some of the largest banks out there, because we kind of try to figure that out in terms of don't move the data, but ask questions from the data and run an algorithm on the premises of your customer, and then bring non-identifiable tokenized data back. I don't want to get into the details, but that's a very interesting area. Blockchain may be connected to that if you want to build some trust around that, but that's a whole new ecosystem, and it's not going to come from banks. It's going to come from universities. It's going to come from startups, so there's a lot of opportunity.
Makes sense.
It's really representative, though, I think, of something that is imperative as we start to engage with banks, and I think you've put a really fine point on it, is that you're doing a tremendous amount of education and knowledge transfer from your businesses back into banks. And there's a real question, I think, that banks think about in terms of the adoption of these type of technologies around data specifically. And I think it speaks to a whole bunch of readiness things that you need to think about as you're starting to think about either your investments or in terms of your products specifically. One, is a bank structured from an architecture perspective to be able to engage with this type of product set? Two, does it actually have the people, processes, and practices to even think about the changes that are available or that are going to come by virtue of adopting this technology? And I think one of the most important ones is, what nail is this hammer really trying to hit? And so I see a lot of examples in the marketplace where there's fantastic uses of AI, machine learning, and data to be able to demonstrate insights and new opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily anchor on the job to be done that the banker is interested in. How does this help me with my top line revenue? How does this mitigate expenses? How do I mitigate fraud? How do I manage NCL? So this balance between academia and a banking lens, I think, is really critical in the creation of a value proposition in this space.
Thank you.
I would like to focus on the other side of it. So from a startup and what we were facing, we faced this data issue. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good product you have, somebody has to pay for it. So I want to focus on the adoption and what the challenges that we are seeing from the market in adopting an AI solution. So in regulated industries, by the definition, there's somebody that regulates everything. And you have certification and regulation. And generally, the law tend to be lagging in terms of the technology. So the first thing that we are seeing is that before you can get a massive adoption of a specific products that are AI-based, you have to get the regulatory bodies and the certification bodies to accept that. And I can tell you that in the industry that we are tackling first, it is a challenge in the sense that the regulatory bodies are starting to realize AI is here to stay, and we have to do something about it. But what is this animal called AI? We don't understand that. And now they are starting to really get into it, and this is now 3 years later. So that these organizations are starting to realize it. So that's one thing. Now, the adoption of a B2B type of a product by the organization, the enterprises that are going to adopt it, they have another, so check mark number one, do the regulatory body accept AI as a legitimate solution? And then the next thing that they have, they list 4 problems. One is the issue of the black box. Well, it's a black box, you're giving me the answer. If you remember your university days, when the professor said, well, don't give me the answer, show me how you got there. So they are very concerned that you're giving them a black box, and that's a challenge. Challenge number 2 is privacy, and we talked about the privacy and the data here. And I was part of a panel. The government is just launching now a discussion about the data and who owns the data, right? It's good to have all the data, but who owns the data, right? And there is a whole consultation. If you guys interested should participate. The government is looking at that. What do we do with all the data that exists today? Who owns it? And we know that in Europe we have the GDPR. So that whole issue of privacy is another way of slowing down the adoption. The third one, of course, is the bias, and the last one is the ethical. All of these elements are going to stop the adoption. If you look at the last one of the ethical, if you are Mercedes, they say, well, you know the dilemma. If you are driving self-driving car and you have a grandma, 70 years old, and they have a 10-year-old, who are you going to hit? The ethical question. And what Mercedes says, well, we are going to select the safety of the driver. But these are the issues that are going to stop the adoption or delay the adoption of AI-based solutions.
I would love to give every startup, like, what's the one takeaway in like 5 seconds? Like, what would you advise startups now that start working with AI or integrate AI into their solution? Chris.
So I'm not sure this would be AI specific, but focus. Too many times I meet entrepreneurs that have 4 different verticals, and financial services is one of those 4 verticals, and this is a FinTech conference, so I'm sure you're focused as can be on your FinTech vertical only, but focus, and if you have an AI, machine learning set of buzzwords in your deck or on the first page, make sure that, to the point about the nail you're hitting, tell me the problem you're solving. I thought what Eli said earlier is dead on. I want to know specifically the pain point, the ROI, so focus on that pain point and ROI, and that'll make the meeting go longer and get a second meeting, in fact.
That's a good advice.
I would just summarize in 3 words: solve a real problem. If you want to succeed, solve a real problem.
I would say look at AI as more like an interdisciplinary approach rather than a computer science or an algorithmic approach, and build teams that are small, agile, interdisciplinary, and then really help them to focus on solving a problem. Looking at AI purely as an algorithmic innovation is very difficult to commercialize. And the last thing I would say is that use AI to build decision support tools, not necessarily decision maker tools. We are still very smart beings. We have gut feelings. We have intuition. That's not going to go away. I don't believe in that theory that robots are going to come and kill us soon. But we are all going to benefit from tools that allows us to make better decisions and allows us to consult with them. And that's a design principle. And for those of you interested in design thinking, bringing that to the world and applying that will really help you to build great AI products and companies.
I think that a good place to start is thinking of AI as an enabling capability. And that the most important thing to do is to get started. So take a crawl, walk, run approach. Again, very narrow focus to be able to prove out a value proposition that is both important to the bank and the end customer. Finding that intersection between the two is highly accretive. And I echo your point that this is about the rise of the machine. This is not about the arrival of the machine. And therefore, being very mindful about when can AI support me in terms of automatic, assistive, and agentive type of experiences that you're building.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.